So I'd like to begin by asking you to think a little bit about the way that your mind interacts with the different material objects that you see throughout your day. So imagine, if you will, for a minute that you're in a museum. And as you walk through different gallery rooms filled with beautiful sculptures and paintings, you come to see just a simple chair that's on display. So as you look at this chair, my guess is that you might think about its appearance, you might think about the material that it's made out of, or you might ask yourself what it's doing in a museum, right? You might think, why is this chair worthy of being considered art? So my project investigates these types of experiences in the context of Victorian literature and science. In the attempt to investigate the way that visual perception was used by writers to communicate realities about the connections between human subjects and the material world. And what I've found is that very often Victorian writers were less interested in those external descriptions of objects and more interested in the way that their bodies felt when they looked at them. So to give you an example, in the 1890s, the British writer Vernon Lee did a real-life version of the exercise I just asked you to think through. She went into museums and she looked at objects and she recorded her reactions to them. But her reactions were very different from our reactions. In fact, when she looked at a chair, she said that she could feel her body extending upwards as she looked at in imitation of the height of the chair. And as she looked at its two legs, she could feel her body expanding and moving in two different directions. So through this very odd type of writing, she's actually arguing that when she looked at an object, her body became more like that object. And when you look at the language she uses to describe this process, it's excited and almost even erotic at times. She uses words like bodily rapture, stimulation, and penetration to describe visual contact. So my research investigates these types of accounts in both scientific texts and novels, attempting to argue that visual perception teaches us a great amount about how the Victorians saw the world. And by investigating their types of diverse theories of perceptions, we can remind ourselves today that our own modes of experiencing the world are not universally consistent, but instead grounded in the diverse workings of our own particular bodies and minds. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to begin today by asking you to think a little bit about the way that your mind interacts with different material objects that you see as you move through your daily life. So imagine, if you will, that you're in a museum, and as you move through different rooms and you're looking at beautiful sculptures and beautiful paintings, you come to see just a regular chair that's been put on display. My guess is that as you look at this chair, you might think about its appearance, you might think about the artist that made it, or you might ask yourself why it's even being displayed in the museum and what makes it worthy of being considered art. So my project investigates these types of experiences and questions in the context of 19th century literature, arguing that the Victorians used visual perception to explore the relationship between individual human subjects and the larger material world. So what I've found is that very often Victorian writers were less concerned with those external descriptions, say that chair's color, size, or texture, and more concerned with the way that their bodies felt when they looked at material things. So I'll give you an example. In the 1890s, the British writer Vernon Lee did a real-life version of the experiment or the exercise I just asked you to think about. So she went into museums and she recorded her reactions to different objects that she saw there. But unlike our reactions, she actually claimed that when she looked at a chair, she could feel her body extending upwards in imitation of the chair's height, and that as she looked at the chair's two different legs, she could feel her body expanding in two different directions. So in essence, what she very strangely argued was that when she looked at an object, her body would feel more like that object. And when you look at the language that she uses to describe this experience, she not only finds it exciting, but also erotic. She uses words like penetration, stimulation, and bodily rapture. So as I said, my project investigates these types of experiences in both literature and science, arguing that the Victorians saw themselves as more intimately connected to their material world than ever before. And by investigating these types of theories about perception, we can remind ourselves today that our own experiences are not universal, and we each perceive our environments in different ways based on our own particular workings of bodies and minds. Thank you.
Annie Summers.